Odessa turned her back on Seoul, on her scholarship, and on the one man she loved, to protect herself from the danger plotting in Seoul. Will the danger follow her to England? Will Ryo be able to fight against his family for love? Will Odessa ever find her way back to Seoul? Hey besties, I heard you were asking for part 2, and because you're our favorites, we've delivered. If you haven't watched part 1, click the link above to catch up. You won't fully understand this chapter without seeing how it all started. If you're already curious about this story, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. We bring you only the best, and you don't want to miss a thing. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's get back to the story. Odessa had a window seat. Seoul shrank below the clouds until it was just light, then dark, then nothing. The burner phone sat in her bag with one number in it, just one. It felt like a lifeline someone had handed her on the way out of a burning building. She thought about the night before, his hands on her face, and the way he had said yes like it cost him everything. She thought about all the women who had walked out of his front door in the mornings, and how she used to stand at the kitchen counter telling herself the tightness in her chest was nothing. Pattern recognition. Her father's daughter. She had been lying to herself for months. Somewhere over the ocean, she stopped. The irritation she felt every time a woman left his house had never been discussed. It was jealousy plain, ordinary, humiliating jealousy. At 30,000 feet, there was nowhere to put it but to feel it. She had fallen for him. A man who looked exactly like everything she had sworn she never wanted. Leaving him had been one of the most painful things she had ever done. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't given herself permission to want him enough for it to hurt this much. Then the other thought came. She was going home with nothing. She had left Birmingham with a plan, a scholarship, a purpose, a way to fix things, and instead, she had spent 7 months falling in love with her mafia boss. How was she supposed to explain that to her mother, the woman who worked 3 jobs and cried quietly so her kids wouldn't hear? The clouds shifted. Seoul was gone. Birmingham was still hours away. She sat with it. That was all she could do. She stood outside the front door for longer than she meant to. The street looked exactly the same. Same houses, same light, same narrow pavement. She had changed completely, but the street hadn't moved an inch. She had decided on the plane that she wasn't going to cry in front of her mother. She believed that right up until the moment the door opened. Diane stood there, eyes wide, her face shifting from shock to relief, and then to something that wasn't quite grief but lived right next to it. "Mama," Odessa said, and her voice broke completely. She had held it together through the entire journey and lasted exactly 1 second past seeing her mother's face. Diane pulled her in without a word. She didn't ask what happened or why her daughter was on the doorstep with 2 bags and red eyes. She just held her, because some things don't need an explanation, they just need somewhere to land. She brought Odessa upstairs to her old room. The space had become half storage boxes stacked against the wall, dust on the windowsill, a room that had been quietly repurposed the way rooms do when the person they belong to leaves. They sat among the boxes, and Diane watched her daughter with the quiet attention of a woman who had learned to read between the lines of everything her children said. Then she went to get her something to eat. The moment she left, Odessa reached into her bag and pulled out the burner phone. She dialed the number. He picked up before the second ring. Odessa? Just her name. That was all he said, but she could hear everything he hadn't been able to say for 14 hours packed into those 2 syllables. The fear, the relief, the weight of waiting. "I'm fine," she said, her voice cracking on the second word. She was not entirely fine, and he would hear that immediately. There was no point in pretending. "I'm sorry." His voice was low and controlled, the way it got when he was feeling something too large to hold. "I'm sorry my world wasn't safe for you." She could hear her own sobbing on the line. If someone had asked her then why she was crying, she wouldn't have been able to give just one reason. There were too many. She was afraid of what came next. She was angry at herself for believing, in the quiet places she didn't let herself look at directly, that it could ever work. She was grieving something she had never properly let herself have. "I'll fix this," he said. "For you. For us." The call dropped. She sat there holding the phone, tears running freely down her face, and looked up to find her mother standing in the doorway with a plate of jollof rice and fried plantain. Diane didn't say anything about the phone. She just sat beside her daughter, put the plate in her hands, and waited. They talked for a long time that night. It all came out that night, in pieces, the way real confessions do. She told her mother how Seoul had felt, at first, the lights, the language she was still learning, and the relief of finally being somewhere nobody knew her history. Then she told her How that relief had quietly turned into something else. A man. A house full of women who came and went. A kiss he called a mistake the second after it happened. And underneath all of it, the thing she hadn't said out loud until tonight, she thought she was in love with him. "I went there for Kofi," she said. "For you. And somewhere along the way, I let myself fall for someone exactly like Dad. Now I'm back here with nothing because of it." Diane listened. She didn't interrupt once. "Your dad was a cheat, not just because he liked women, but because he had already promised forever to one woman while still making promises to others," Diane said. Odessa looked at her. "Ryo," she said his name carefully, as if trying out the shape of it. "He didn't need to love you. He wanted to. But what if he can't change, Mum? What if he just can't help being with other women? What if that's just who he is?" Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she kissed her daughter on the forehead and said, "That's not for you to carry. What a man decides to do or not do doesn't change who you are or what you're building. You have your whole future ahead of you." She spoke gently, but her stomach turned as she said it. Looking at her beautiful, brilliant daughter, already half in love with a complicated man, Diane saw herself at 24, looking at Marcus Cole and thinking, "He's difficult, but he chose me." She was seeing the beginning of a story she already knew the end of, and she was terrified. She didn't want to project her own fears onto her daughter. She did not say anything more. She kissed Odessa's forehead and told her they'd sort out university together, scholarship or not. Her daughter mattered more than any plan. Odessa said she regretted leaving the scholarship behind in Seoul. "It was a good decision," Diane said simply. "Taking his advice was better than staying somewhere for a future you didn't understand. We will get you into a university," Diane continued. "We will work twice as hard. You're more important to me than any scholarship." Odessa nodded and ate her food. She was exhausted in the way you are when you have been strong for too long and have finally found somewhere safe to stop. The next morning, she got a new phone and a new SIM, exactly as he had instructed. He had made her promise never to call him on the new phone burner only. She was setting everything up at the kitchen table when she saw the email. It had arrived 14 hours ago while she was still on the plane. A full scholarship, 4 years, at one of the top universities in England. She made a sound she had never made before, something between a scream and a laugh, and ran to find her mother in the kitchen. She grabbed her by both arms, and they jumped up and down in their Birmingham house like two people who had just been told the worst part was over. It was him. She knew it was him before she even finished reading. He had made that promise on the way to the airport. "I will handle the scholarship. I will handle the bills. I will handle everything." And she had heard it the way you hear promises from people facing something dangerous, with love, but without certainty. She hadn't let herself fully believe it, and yet here it was in her inbox, proof that he had meant every word. She ran for the burner phone. He answered immediately. She told him everything, the email, the school, the scholarship. Her mother's face and her voice was completely different from the night before. Alive, warm, like herself again. He listened with a smile he wouldn't let her see. The last time he had heard her voice, she had been crying so hard he could barely make out the words. This was better. This was the voice he wanted to hear on the other side of whatever was coming. "Stay low-key," he said when she finished. "I don't know how long this will take, but I'll make sure you're safe." He paused. "For me." Those two words stopped her. She sat with them for a moment longer than she should have. She visited Kofi that afternoon with her mother. He was doing better, and the doctors said he could continue his treatment at home. He sat up in bed when he saw her and asked why she was back. She gave him an easy answer, because he was her baby brother, and she had been carrying things for him since before he was old enough to notice. She sat beside him, holding his hand, and thought about how Ryo's money was the reason her brother was recovering. A man she had gone to work for, because she had no other option, had quietly made sure the most important person in her life was going to be all right. She thought about that for a long time, unsure of what to do with the overwhelming feeling it left in her chest. In Seoul, No Daye sat in her father's house and told him everything. Daye didn't cry. She never cried when she was angry. Tears were for people who wanted comfort, and comfort was the last thing she wanted right now. She sat across from her father and told him what she'd seen, the maid, in his shirt, coming out of the hallway like she belonged there. And the way Ryo had looked at her, not at Daye, never at Daye, as if she weren't even in the room. "He chose an ordinary black maid over me," she said. "Over everything. Over us." No Tae-san listened. That was the thing about her father that people always underestimated until it was too late. He wasn't a man who reacted. He was a man who calculated. He had built the most feared operation in Seoul by being the most patient person in the room. He listened to his daughter with the stillness of someone assembling data. When she was done, he stood up without a word, and everyone knew something was about to happen. No, Yuri had been in the room the whole time. She sat in the corner, as she always did when her husband spoke, present, silent, invisible by choice. Having been Taesan's wife for 31 years, she had learned early that the most powerful position in any room was the one he forgot to account for. She watched her daughter stand in the middle of the room after her husband left, fury still bright on her face, and felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Not sympathy, exactly recognition. Dahye was 30 years old and had never once been told no. Not by her father, and not by anyone her father decided she deserved. She had been raised to believe that being chosen was her right, and that refusal was an error to be corrected through pressure. Taesan had built his daughter in his own image and called it love. Yuri looked at her and saw a woman who didn't yet know the cost of being that way. What you gave up, what you never got back. She stood up. The room had emptied after Taesan walked out. They were alone. Dahye. Her daughter turned. She had her father's face when she was angry, the jaw, the stillness, the eyes that calculated instead of felt. He didn't choose anyone over you, Yuri said quietly. He probably loves her, and that should be all right. Dahye stared at her, even more annoyed. You have your father's pride, Yuri continued. I used to think that was a gift. She said nothing else. She walked out, leaving Dahye standing there with an expression she wouldn't let anyone else see, something uncertain, frustrated, and unable to process what had just been said. It was the last real conversation they would have for a long time. Taesan scheduled a meeting with Gong-woo. Woo arrived expecting a routine conversation. They had been doing business for decades. This was how it went. You sat down, you discussed, you left with clarity. He settled into the chair across from Taesan, not yet registering that the temperature in the room had shifted. Then Taesan spoke. Your son doesn't want to marry my daughter. He said it like he was stating a fact about the weather. Do you know that? Woo kept his expression easy. My son can be stubborn. It won't be difficult to convince him. He believed this completely. Ryo wasn't refusing because he was in love. Woo was certain of that. He was refusing because he wasn't ready to give up his freedom. If Woo were honest, he respected that more than Taeseo's softness. A son who wouldn't give up his appetites for an arrangement was, to Woo, more of a gong man than one who fell apart over a woman he couldn't keep. He was not prepared for what came next. I heard the Kang family had trouble with your first son, Taesan said in that same quiet voice. I have no intention of having the same trouble with you. Not over your son sleeping with his black maid. He let that sink in. Your son is in love, Woo. He was just better at hiding it than your first one. My daughter figured it out when she saw them together. Woo said nothing. Here is what is going to happen, Taesan continued. You are going to convince your son to marry Dahye. If you cannot, I will withdraw from every agreement we have made in the last 20 years. Your operation will lose every protection my name provides. And the girl, he said it without heat, which made it more frightening. I will find her, and she will spend the rest of her life understanding what it costs to be an obstruction to my family's plans. He looked away. We have been working together for decades. Woo, don't let it end over this. The conversation was over. Taesan had looked away, his way of saying, I have given you the information, now carry it. If this story already has you feeling things, you know what to do. Hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. Part 2 has only just started, and I promise you, what happens next is what occurs when two families decide that love is an inconvenience they cannot afford. Gong-woo sat in his car for a long time before he started driving. Ara knew something was wrong. Before he said a word, 30 years of marriage had taught her to read his face before he opened his mouth. She didn't ask. She told the maid to bring wine, sat beside him and waited. 30 minutes later, with the glass half empty, he started talking. The meeting, the threat, what it meant for the business and everything they'd built, Ryo's refusal of Dahye, Taeseo and the Kang family sitting underneath it all, like a warning nobody wanted to look at. He told her he had hoped at least one of his sons would understand that some things weren't about want, they were about what had to be done. Ara listened to all of it. She thought about Taeseo and what it had cost Woo to pull him away from the woman he loved years ago. He'd never really forgiven himself for that. Now here he was, about to do it again to his second son, and she could see it breaking him quietly in the exact same place. She took the glass from his hand. I'll call Ryo, she said. Dinner tomorrow. Maybe he'll listen to me. She put him to bed, he was properly drunk by then, and stood in the dark for a moment. The hypocrisy never failed to strike her. Wu wasn't really mafia at heart. He was a man who'd been poor once and never gotten over the fear of it. Everything he'd built was an attempt to run from that fear. And she, Ara, had been exactly what he was now refusing to let his sons have. No name, no connections, nothing. He'd fallen for her anyway, built an empire with her anyway, and yet somehow convinced himself his sons didn't get to make the same mistake. It always baffled her. But she loved him regardless. She called Ryo in the morning. Dinner tomorrow. Family. The dinner table was filled with the kind of silence everyone maintained on purpose, the silence of people pretending they don't know why they're really there. Ara asked about Taeseo's wife. Taeseo answered quietly. She wasn't feeling well due to the pregnancy and sent her apologies. He said it with the practiced ease of a man who had spent years answering questions about his marriage without saying anything real. His wife had her own life that she'd given up when their families decided they were a match. They had spent years in the same house, hating each other for things neither had chosen, and eventually they had stopped even bothering to hate, becoming merely two people coexisting. He had always resented his parents for their role in it, though he was quieter about it now. Wu and Ryo had not spoken since Ryo sat down. They were watching each other the way people do when they both know what the meal is actually about. "What about you, Ryo?" Ara said in that calm voice she used when she wanted something to sound casual. "How is Dahi?" Ryo looked at his father before looking at his mother. "I don't know, Mum. You can call her and ask. She is someone you're supposed to marry. How could you not know?" "I've told you before," Ryo said. "I don't like her. I'm not interested in marrying her. She is not a likable person." There was a pause. Then Wu spoke. Quietly. In the way he said the most dangerous things without raising his voice at all. "Ryo, tell me, is it because she's not a black maid?" Ara's head snapped toward him. She looked at her husband with an expression she rarely wore, not anger, but the look of someone hearing something significant in public with no time to process it. He hadn't told her. When he had come home and given her the full account, he had left this part out. She was hearing it now, at this table. The room went very still. Ryo had set down his knife. Taeseo watched his younger brother's face and felt a shift in his understanding of the evening. He hadn't known. He had been watching what he thought was a brother with a commitment problem, but this was something else. This was the expression of a man in love. Ryo, the one with the wall, the one who brought home different women to avoid feeling anything real, was sitting across the table wearing his heart on his face without even realizing it. "Was your last maid a black woman?" Ara asked, her voice carrying an edge she couldn't quite hide. "Odessa is a black woman," Ryo said. His voice was cold and precise, leaving no room for argument. "She is no longer my maid, and she has a name." That was when Wu lost the composure he had been maintaining all evening. "You'll destroy my legacy because you think you're in love?" His voice boomed across the table. "With who? Someone without a surname?" Everything came out, not just the anger over Odessa, or the pride of a man defied, but the accumulated weight of Taeseo, the Kangs, the no family's threat, and decades of building something he was terrified of losing. He spoke of legacy and names, and of a son who would destroy everything for someone without a dynasty surname. Ryo stood up. "I am not marrying Daye," Ryo said. "You can't make me. Mum can't make me. No one at this table can. And if you lay a single hand on her," he stopped, letting the silence finish the thought. "I will burn everything you have built to the ground." Wu went very quiet, a silence more chilling than the shouting. "You won't have to," he said. "The no family will find Odessa themselves. All you have to do is keep refusing." Ryo moved to leave. "I made sacrifices for this family," Taeseo said. His voice was flat. Ryo stopped. "Not because I wanted to, because I had to. And you are standing here telling Mum and Dad that no one can make you do anything." Taeseo continued, looking at his brother. "Even if it burns the empire down." Ryo turned to look at him, at the brother who had lost his light in this same house years ago, and felt something crack in his chest. It had nothing to do with the argument, and everything to do with standing before someone you love and not recognizing them. "You want me to make the same choice that is slowly killing you?" he asked. Taeseo said nothing. "You are heartless," Ryo said quietly, and he walked out of the house with so much pain in him that he could barely see straight. He drove for a long time before pulling over. His father's threat sat in his chest like a cold, expanding weight. She was in England, at a university, visible. Was he being selfish? Was loving her just another way of endangering her? He wanted to hear her voice more than he had wanted anything in weeks. Before he had fully decided, he was already dialing. Ryo. She said his name, and everything in him went quiet. "What are you doing?" he asked, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. "I'm about to go see Kofi," she said. She could hear something in his voice, she always heard it, that slight shift in register when something was wrong, but she didn't ask. She understood that this call was him grounding himself, not looking for a conversation about what had happened, and she let him have that. "I miss you," he said. He meant it in every sense, her moving through his house, her making his coffee, her looking at him as if he were ordinary. He missed their late-night kitchen conversations and the way she made him laugh. He missed all of it, and it scared him how much. "I miss you too," she said. They stayed quiet for a moment before talking about other things, her brother, her new university, the campus she described with wonder. He didn't tell her about the dinner, his father's threat, or his brother's words. She was building something. She didn't need to carry this too. He fought the urge to tell her he loved her before saying goodbye. He wanted to, but he couldn't keep saying it until he was sure he could make it mean what it should, that she was safe, that he had fixed it, and that they had a future that was more than just a wish. He sat in the dark car after the call and made himself a promise. He was not letting go. He hadn't fought his way to feeling something real just to hand it back. He deserved this. He was going to fight for it. She started at her university in England 2 weeks after she arrived. She had always known she was smart, but she'd never had the resources to match her ambition. Walking through the campus for the first time, past buildings that looked like they belonged in a different world, the reality finally landed. She was supposed to be here. She made a friend within the first week. Her name was Stephanie. Stephanie was an it girl, in every sense wealthy, well-connected, and completely comfortable in her own beauty. From that first week, she was everywhere. She complimented Odessa constantly and covered the gap whenever Odessa was short in the cafeteria as if it were nothing. And she was always asking questions, where she grew up, if she'd always been in England, and what her family was like. "Why does it feel like I'm being interrogated?" Odessa asked her once, half joking. "They're just harmless questions," Stephanie said, waving it off. "I just love hearing you talk." Odessa kept her answers to a minimum, growing weary of Stephanie and her relentless questions. Then Trisha arrived, quieter and easy to be around. She slotted into the group effortlessly, and Odessa liked her almost instantly. Trisha would sometimes lean in after one of Stephanie's interrogations and say, "Why is she so interested in you? Doesn't that feel weird to you too?" Odessa would just shrug, seemingly as confused as she was. She started drifting toward Trisha and away from Stephanie. Stephanie didn't like it, but she didn't fight it either. She just kept finding ways back into the space. Showing up where she wasn't expected, she was always somehow still there. In Seoul, Ryo worked through it alone. Every night, he sat with files, contacts, and old records, anything that might give him a way to bring down the No family before they could reach Odessa. But every thread he pulled led him right back to his own family. Same names, same operations, the same tangled history he'd grown up in, except now he was trying to use it as a weapon against the very people who had taught it to him. Every door he opened led back to his own blood. Weeks passed, then a month. He was no closer. And on the other hand, Taiseo had changed. It started small, Taiseo not returning calls, spending more time at their parents' house and more time with their father. Ryo noticed but didn't understand. One evening, after dinner, he caught his brother in the hallway and tried to talk to him properly, just the two of them, like they used to. Taiseo's response was the coldest Ryo had ever received. No explanation, no warmth, just a few flat words before walking into their father's study, the door closing behind him. Ryo stood in the hallway for a long moment. After that, it became a pattern. At the rare family dinners, Taiseo gave him nothing, no eye contact, only the kind of politeness people use when they're just going through the motions. He started turning up at meetings Ryo wasn't invited to, private, important ones. Ryo felt the loss of his brother like a physical weight, sitting in his chest alongside everything else. He had walked out of that dinner certain Taiseo had chosen their father's side. Every week of silence since had only confirmed it. For the first time in his life, he was completely alone. One afternoon, Dahye came to his house. She walked in the way she always walked in, like the space was already hers, like showing up uninvited was just a version of arriving. He ignored her and kept moving, and she followed him. "You got her out of Seoul," she said. "You think that makes her safe from my father." He kept walking. "She's in England, isn't she?" He stopped. He turned. She was looking at him with a smile that lacked any warmth. "That's what I thought," She tilted her head. I want you to understand something, Ryo. The marriage is canceled. I don't even like you, I never did. But you made me look like a fool, and nobody does that to me and walks away clean. So, watch what happens next. And with that, she left. He stood in the hallway, his heart racing at a speed he hadn't felt since the night he put Odessa on a plane. His mind ran through everything. She knew the country. They would find the school. How much time did he have? Who could he call? His phone rang. It was Taiseo. He rejected it. He had too much on his mind, and his brother was the last person he wanted to speak to. It rang again. He picked it up. Before he could say a word, Taiseo said, "Call Odessa right now. Tell her not to follow her friend. She is in danger." The call ended. Ryo dialed the burner immediately. No answer. She had left it at home. She always left it at home, trying to live normally, and the burner didn't fit that life. He looked at the screen for 3 seconds and then called her real number. It no longer mattered if the call was traceable. They already knew where she was. She answered immediately. "Odessa, it's Ryo. Call me Mum." A half-second of silence. Then, "Hey, Mum." Her voice was steady. That was his Odessa. She had understood in an instant what the call meant and had composed herself without being told. "The friend you're going out with is working for Daye," he said. Odessa looked up. Trisha was sitting right across from her, waiting and slightly impatient. Odessa smiled at her, easy, unbothered, and kept talking to Ryo as if nothing had changed. "How's Kofi doing?" she asked. "When do you think he'll be able to come back to school?" She was buying time, thinking on her feet, and giving nothing away to the person standing right next to her. While she talked, she pulled out her phone and quickly texted Stephanie. "Trisha and I are going to a party. Want to join?" She sent Stephanie her location and continued talking to Ryo to maintain the ruse. Stephanie arrived in 3 minutes. Odessa watched Trisha's face when Stephanie appeared. The flash of frustration, controlled but present, told her everything she needed to know. "I thought you said you were done with that nosy girl," Trisha said, eyeing Stephanie as she walked up. Stephanie stopped. Her smile faltered for a half-second, just long enough for Odessa to see it. "Odessa, you think I'm nosy?" she asked. She said it lightly, but there was something almost hurt underneath. "Is that why you've been keeping your distance lately?" "I'm not nosy." Stephanie's voice was quieter now, the performance dropping away. "I know I ask a lot of questions, but it's because I love hearing you talk. I honestly don't care about Trisha. I like you, Odessa. That's why I ask so much. I'm obsessed with you, honestly. But if you don't want me around, I get it." She started to turn, her shoulders dropping, ready to retreat. And something in Odessa shifted a click, pieces sliding into place all at once. Weeks of watching Stephanie sideways, treating her warmth as a threat and her presence as something to be managed. All of it rearranged itself in an instant into something completely, embarrassingly different. Odessa reached out and grabbed her arm before she could walk away. She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from relief as much as humor, because she had been so wrong. She hugged her. "I want you around, Stephanie," she said, "but I'm straight. I like men." "That's fine," Stephanie said without missing a beat. "I completely respect that. Can we go home? I don't think I need to party tonight." Before Trisha could say a word, Stephanie had taken Odessa's arm, and they were in her car pulling away from the curb. Odessa let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for days. She looked out the window, thinking about everything she still needed to say to Ryo and the call she had to make the moment she got back. She did not notice Trisha standing on the pavement, watching the car leave. Taiseo was at Ryo's door 20 minutes after the call. Ryo opened the door and looked at his brother, at the man who had been cold for weeks, who had said those things at dinner, and who had gone silent every time Ryo reached out, feeling the full weight of not knowing who was standing in front of him. Taiseo came in. He sat down, and he told Ryo everything. He was still seeing Yoram. He had never stopped. His wife knew. Not because he had told her, but because she had her own love she had never been allowed to keep a man her family had also decided was unsuitable. The two of them had arrived at a silent understanding years into their marriage. They were not enemies. They were victims of the same system, living together and quietly grieving separate lives. They had hated each other for so long that eventually the hatred cleared, leaving something closer to a sad, mutual understanding. Then he said the part that mattered. "I'm sorry," he said, "for how cold I've been. I had to be. The only way Dad would ever believe I'd actually come around, actually chosen his side over yours, was if I was cold enough that you believed it too." He looked at his brother. "I needed him to trust me. Because once he trusted me, he started taking me into the rooms he never used to let me near. The real meetings. The ones after the dinners, after everyone else had gone. Ryo stared at him. "I've been recording everything," Teseo said. He held up his phone. "Every meeting, every family. Taesan, Dad, all of them, agreements, threats, operations. Enough to put every one of them away. All of them, Ryo. That's the only way to actually stop this. Not refusing a marriage, not threats back and forth. Put them where they can't reach anyone, ever again." "You'd rather go to jail than be kept away from you, Rim?" Ryo asked. Taeseo looked at him. "Yes, though I know it won't come to that," Taeseo continued. "It's our fathers the cops want. If we cooperate and hand over the information, our part in it is small. They'll want the top, not us." He looked at his brother. "But even if they didn't, yes, I would rather go to jail." Ryo sat with that for a long moment. He thought about the boy his brother had been before all of this, warm, genuine, the kind of person who made rooms feel better just by being there. He thought about what it had cost him to dim that light. He thought about the years of watching his brother be excellent at everything yet dead inside. He stood up and hugged him. The real pain in all of this, the one that had sat underneath everything else from the beginning, had been the thought that loving Odessa was costing him his brother. That the thing he needed most was becoming the reason the person he loved most was pulling away from him. Holding Teseo in his hallway, he understood that his brother had never pulled away at all. He had been fighting from the inside the whole time. "Thank you," Ryo said. They stayed up through the night. The plan was not complicated. Teseo had already done the hard work. All that was left was the room. In the morning, before they left, Ryo called Odessa. She picked up and immediately said, "You scared me yesterday. You call me and tell me to call you Mum, and then afterward you don't pick up. Do you know what that did to me?" "I know. I'm sorry." He meant it completely. The last thing he wanted was to make her afraid. "Something is happening today. I can't tell you everything, but I need you to stay away from school, just for today. Ryo, please." She was quiet for a second. "Okay. I'll call you afterward," he said. "I promise." That was all there was time for. They walked into the meeting together. Teseo, they expected. They had been discussing with Teseo in the room for weeks, the obedient heir who had come around to his father's position, who had taken his seat in the meetings, who had proven what it meant to be a gong man. He was supposed to be here. Ryo was not supposed to be there. Wu looked at Teseo like a man recalculating something he thought he understood. Taesan went still assessing, not reacting. The other men at the table shifted. Ryo spoke first. "I'm going to ask everyone to be quiet and listen." Teseo connected his phone to the speaker in the room. The voices began. They all recognized their own voices. That was the thing about recordings. You cannot argue with the sound of yourself. Taesan's voice, Wu's voice, others. Threats that had been made in rooms they thought were private, agreements that were not legal. Plans for Odessa that turned the air in the room cold when they played back in plain audio. The recording was still playing when one of Taesan's men moved. It was a small movement, a shift in position, a hand going somewhere. It had no reason to go, the kind of adjustment that meant only one thing in a room like this. Ryo saw it. Teseo saw it. Neither of them moved. Ryo looked at Taesan. "Tell him to stop," he said. Taesan said nothing. He just looked at Ryo the way a man does when he has spent decades making others blink first. "You think a recording stops a bullet?" Taesan asked. Quietly, almost conversationally. The room went very still. Ryo looked at him, did not look away, did not raise his voice, and showed nothing in his face that could be read as fear. Men like Taesan fed on fear the way they fed on everything, by consuming it completely. "No," Ryo said. "But the thing is, even if this is where it ends for me, this recording is set to go live to the police in 15 minutes if I don't go out and stop it. So, make your choice, Taesan." He held Taesan's gaze. "You have built 30 years on not being found, on being the name behind the name, the pressure nobody could trace." He paused. "But if anything happens to me and my brother, I'll destroy everything in 15 minutes. The silence was long enough to mean something. Then Taesan looked at his man and gave the smallest shake of his head. The man's hand returned to the table. "You said we could trust your son." Taesan's voice was the first one to break through, though now it was different, not fury, but the sound of a man recalibrating in real time. He was looking at Wu. "Yes," Ryo said. "You can. Trust us to dismantle everything you have built and replace it with something that does not run on other people's pain." He let one beat pass. "You have less than 10 minutes before everything you just heard is sent to every relevant authority in Seoul. If we are not out of this building before then, it sends automatically. He looked at Tae-san. Call off whatever you have running in England. Right now. Tae-san looked at him for a long moment. Then he took out his phone and made a call. All of you are retiring, Ryo said. You are already too old. Your children will continue from here, in a different way, in a different direction. Without the methods that made those recordings possible. He looked at his father, directly, without flinching, and then he looked back at Tae-san. Tell your daughter she is not a likable person, he said, and that I am glad I dodged the bullet. He walked out, Taeseo following behind. Outside the building, the morning air was clean and cold. Ryo stood in it for a moment and breathed. Go, Taeseo said. Go and meet her. Ryo turned and looked at his brother. He hugged him once more, tight, the way you hold people when words are insufficient. Then he ran. The private jet crossed the sky while Seoul slept. He had expected to feel relief. He'd won. Odessa was safe, the No family was neutralized, and the only thing left was distance, and distance was temporary. Instead, he felt fear. Not the kind he knew, the operational kind that resolved through action. This was smaller, quieter. He had no idea what he was going to say when she opened that door. He'd run through it on the drive, on the way through the terminal, in his seat, and every version sounded wrong. He'd spent 8 years being excellent at not needing anyone, and then a woman arrived in his hallway with 2 bags and looked at him like he was ordinary and dismantled all of it in 7 months. Now he was flying 14 hours and he genuinely didn't know how to do this part. What if the weeks had changed something? She was building a new life, new school, new city, Stephanie. She was 24 and brilliant, and she moved forward the way she moved through everything, without looking back. What if forward had stopped including him? He sat with the uncertainty and let it be there, because for once there was nothing to fix. Birmingham came up on the horizon, pale and gold. He thought about the way she hadn't looked back at the airport, what it must have cost her not to. He'd watched her walk away and thought about her courage. He hadn't thought about what it would feel like when she watched him walk toward her. He hoped she'd let him. He landed, found a car, and found the street. The street was ordinary. Terraced houses, quiet pavement, gray morning light. He found the address and stood outside. His hand was shaking. Hardly anything had ever made his hand shake. He stood at the door and waited for a while. Finally, he raised his fist and knocked. The door opened. Diane Cole stood in the doorway and looked at him. She didn't need an introduction. Her daughter had described this man so many times, in so much detail, that Diane recognized him instantly, the way you recognize someone you've never met because you've heard enough about them to know them. She smiled. He bowed. She stepped aside. He came in. Kofi was in the living room, sitting up with the easy confidence of someone who was genuinely getting better. He looked at this tall, tattooed Korean man standing in their Birmingham living room and grinned. I'm guessing you're the man Odessa is in love with. Diane shot him a look that he ignored completely. Then, she went to the bottom of the stairs. Odessa, she called. Someone is here for you. Footsteps echoed from above. Then she appeared at the top of the stairs. She saw him. She stopped. 1 second. 2. Her hand gripped the banister. Her face did everything at once, shock, disbelief, and then something that broke open completely. She ran. She came down those stairs faster than Ryo had time to prepare for, and reached him, and he caught her, and she kissed him before anything else, before he could speak, before he could say the thing he had flown 14 hours to say. And it tasted like relief and grief, and all the weeks they had been a world apart, and she was holding his face with both hands the way you hold something you almost lost. He wrapped his arms around her and held her the way he had wanted to hold her at the airport when he was watching her walk away and could not. He held her like the holding was the apology and the promise and everything he had not been able to say across all those phone calls and all that distance. He pulled back slightly to look at her face. It's over, he said. We won. I've missed you. She kissed him again. Kofi looked dramatically away at the ceiling. Diane stood in the kitchen doorway with her hand over her mouth, watching her daughter, her brilliant, stubborn, extraordinary daughter who had been carrying everything for so long, finally get to put it down. Stephanie met him 3 days later and stared for a full 10 seconds before saying, if that were my man, I would be straight too. Odessa laughed harder than she had laughed in months. Stephanie became her person, the kind of friend who felt like family, who showed up without being asked, who made Birmingham feel less like a detour and more like the place where the real life had been waiting all along. Ryo stayed. He built his business from England while Odessa finished her degree because she wasn't done yet and he wasn't going anywhere. He had made a promise and meant it, and she was going to finish what she had come to start. The wedding was small and exclusive, held at a venue in the English countryside on a day when the sky was clear and golden. The guest list was short enough that every person in the room was someone who had earned the right to be there. Ara came. She flew alone. Wu was not there, and that was its own kind of answer to a question no one at the wedding had asked out loud. She sat in the front row, and when the ceremony was done and Odessa came back up the aisle, she reached out and took her hands, both of them. She looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then she smiled and let her go. It was enough. Marcus had heard about the wedding and sent a message. Odessa read it on the morning of her wedding day, put her phone face down on the dressing table, and went back to the mirror. She did not pick it up again. Some doors close, not with a fight, but with a silence. That silence was hers to keep. Taiseo went to Urim that evening, the way he always did, quietly, carefully, checking the street before he knocked. She opened the door already half smiling, already starting to ask how it had gone. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there. "It's done," he said. "All of it. We don't have to be careful anymore." She looked at him for a long moment, as if waiting for the rest of the sentence, the part where something went wrong, the part that always came. It didn't come. She stepped back and let him in, just as she always did. Except this time, neither of them checked the street first. Dahye became what happens to people who build their significance entirely on being chosen, irrelevant. The No family stepped back from the world they had been operating in. Dahye stepped back with them. Ryo did not think at all, and when he did, it was only pity. They moved to Seoul when Odessa graduated. She had built herself into someone formidable across 4 years of England education, and she arrived in Seoul as a marketer, not a maid, and the city received her accordingly. Ryo was building something different from what his father had built, slower, quieter, with fewer bodies in the architecture. One morning, she was in their kitchen in a different mansion, somewhere they had chosen together, something that was theirs. She was at the counter when he came in, and she turned to look at him. He knew before she said a word. He crossed the kitchen and put his hand on her stomach. The story had started in a kitchen. A woman arriving with 2 bags and nowhere to be, and a man who had decided at 17 that he would not let anything reach him. It ended in a kitchen, too. The same 2 people, the same kitchen warmth, none of the same walls. That was enough. That was everything. And that is where I leave you. 2 people in a kitchen who chose each other when everything around them said not to, and built something neither of them had been taught to expect. Drop every thought you have in the comments. When did you feel it shift? Was it the dinner table? The airport? The moment he knocked on that Birmingham door with his hand shaking? Tell me where you are watching from, because I read every single one. Subscribe if you are not already here. Turn on your notifications, because I have more stories where this one came from, and the next one is going to take something from you too. I will see you there.